Could be known as the Ruston Pyramid because I invented it or figured it out. So here's how this works. I've heard of I think I heard of Fibonacci actually later on. This is a this is like having blocks of, let's say that you have all the numbers from 1 to whatever number, and well, this number has to be 32, doesn't it? But then does 32 show up in the past? No. Great. Cool. Moving on. So, how does this work? Well, if I have, it's real basics. Pretend that you have a set of blocks from 1 to 100, right? And you end up taking the first two of any of those blocks, and then you say, well, that number no longer exists. It is no longer on the real number line. It's on top of now the sum of the two. And so you end up adding it all together. And because I realized how sums work, I can automate this process and really be sure of what happens. Is like, oh, this is the sum of these two numbers. And so I have to write in a 0 anytime there's a number that's been removed. So what you end up with is things like this gap here that happens on the second row. That is the sum of the two numbers, but because of its value from the real number line, which is the original set, is already been displaced somewhere else. It's already been used as a building block. It can't be used again, so this just ends up becoming a 0. Right? Because it can't be used there, and it can't be used on the real number line, so it must be, because it's here, a product of 13 and 18. So that's interesting. So I ended up doing that for a bit, and what I ended up with is this, where I went a little further with it, and then I ended up with antimatter, where all of the negative spots, where everything was removed, I denoted as negative, and starting with, now I may have done this wrong because I start with, oh no, here's how it works. Okay, so every two negative numbers, numbers that had already been removed, get pushed to the side. They ended up making their own positive of a negative value. So every two numbers that are now void would be used to make the next thing. So you end up with this, which is the sum of the 13 and the original 12 void. Well, original 12 void technically is that part of, or is that number in the negative used over here? That's interesting. And I didn't think of that. I just thought I didn't actually I should have probably removed it. And then that would make the next number be actually 13 minus and 18 minus, which of course already takes place over here. It's 31. But I ended up with this. And so it's why I made a second sheet, because I redid the process, and I think I did it differently this time, where there's the numbers 12 and 13 for some reason. These are just recounting what numbers are missing and would be there if otherwise, like just the real numbers just moved adjacently. And for some reason 31 is over there. I don't know why 31's over there. Oh, right, because it's the number that's missing out of the 15, 16. And that's a different way of looking at it. So what happens is as you go along the series, you're just adding every two numbers together and essentially making the next number that's on whatever the sum is to be on the next row, and then the next two numbers that are on the real number line that are blocks that we can actually use are 4 and 5, so we end up with 9. And then those two blocks that are on the second row, we do the same process, so we end up with 12. And then we have 6 and 7, making 13. 8, we jump 9 because it has already been used, so we use 10 because that's what we have. And then we end up with 18. 13 and 18 make 31, so that means it can't be used again. And 31 and 12 make 43. We keep going along the line, and we end up finding out that the first number that comes out that was already used on the second line is already like it's so early, it's just 31. And it's like, So you end up wondering, what are my main question in this series of numbers, which I'm pretty sure I've never heard of anyone talk about, how many, as you go along, obviously the bigger the numbers you add together, the more gaps you end up making. So like 100, eventually 109 90 ends up being a number. It's the highest number so far that we have. That is, but over here, if you look, eventually we quickly go from numbers within the 100 range to numbers in the thousands. And it's ruler shaped as well. It has slightly ruler shape, but it has like this other thing. When you include the alternate reality stuff or the antimatter relations thing, then you end up with numbers that exist in both scenarios, but in different places. Like 129, it exists in both alternative and regular realities. That's neat. Or 77, which is like, it's an alternate reality number. Doesn't exist in the other one. And is a product of other things. And it's a whole thing that I did back in high school where I would just write down these numbers just by doing the number pyramid process. So I would have
searching for a rewarding.
So I would have the real number, all of the real numbers would be individual blocks, and just on paper I would do this process. And it was neat to think of that, and then like, well, obviously you think of the doubling, right? And it's similar to some things, but obviously you end up with only 700 over here, right? But then you go on to the next level, you've added two things of the previous, so you end up with obviously more. And then you've added these two things to make this, so you have more. And you end up with this, which was not as much, and you end up with even more. And it's like, it's not the same kind of distribution as, like, obviously the number from here to there is not twice as much. It's only 700 added on. So that's the thing, is that it's not about multiplying anything, it's only addition. And then you end up with this thing that happens where it just is. It was very fascinating to me, and the problem is I end up wondering, well, what's the significance of this? What is the thing that this relates to? And does it show up in nature? Does anything like that do anything? I made margin notes in the top where it's like, okay, we have all these other things that we could be reading, like this one, which says this entire paragraph of something, this says another paragraph, this says another, so on and so forth. I don't know why that happened. And so on. And keep going. And it's a weird way of processing information. But anyhow, knowing that the numbers obviously add up, and it reminds me a little bit of Fibonacci, but it's not Fibonacci is the thing. Slightly different. Although Fibonacci numbers show up, there's also 9, and 5 doesn't show up in the second row. So that's obvious because you end up not adding numbers that are this number and then the number above that. You add just pairs that have happened and pairs that remain. And then the pairs on the next level that have happened and the pairs that remain. And eventually you end up with something that's been just a bunch of things that if they were to all be... And here's the thing. This is specifically something that does not happen in nature. Because why would it? Because why would you add 28 and 27 together? That doesn't make any real sense. It doesn't mean anything for a biological process to do something like that. So what could that possibly be? I mean, is it atomic number? Is it something else? No, it's just how the block puzzle works. And so it's a kid's game. It's something basic that you could just do. You have 1 and 2, well, 3 goes on top of that. 4 and 5 you have left, well, 9 goes on top of that. And you can know the additions tables that way. But then when you have, imagine if you have all 4 blocks on the bottom, 2 blocks on top, and then the 12 goes between them. So you end up with this pyramid that you're making. And in three-dimensional space, it's slightly interesting where you have that happen. And then I've tried to make a block pyramid in Minecraft, and it's curious, it's different, and I don't know how to really describe it. Because you have to have like enough spaces so you can read all the numbers, and you'd have signs or whatever places to explain what you're working with. And then the signs have to go on something usually. And it's a mess trying to do block pyramid. But it'd be nice to make that structure again and see how it develops. But it's just a lot of just doing the process. And for an individual, it's like I would love to have a program be able to learn that you add 1 and the next every 2 numbers you add together, then you have to move. It's a thing that has to go through the process manually. Like 12 and 13 are right next to each other, and they're both gone because they've been used already. Those blocks don't exist on the real number line anymore. They have already been occupied somewhere else. So you have this big jump of 14 and 11 that ends up needing to be added together to make 25, which is kind of silly. So yeah, it's literally something that a program could work it out, but there's no like rule for how the numbers appear on the line. It's all based off of like the space between numbers. You got 6 here, and then you have 5 between each 0. So what made that happen? Well, all the other numbers that are removed were removed because they were used. So like 25 is up here now, and 31 is all the way up here instead. And then you have 36, which will be removed later, and 43, which will be removed later, and 41 is actually removed earlier, but then 43 is already removed. Just like 25 is removed up here, but then you have 31, which is already removed. And it's like these numbers just are removed out of sequence. And so in order to progress forward, you have to start with the addition and process each and every function. Check if it's already been used. If it's already been used, it doesn't exist anymore. So you could make a program that easily follows these rules, but you also have to follow them for the next line. So like 3 and 9 need to be used to make 12, and 12 and 31 have to be checked off and understood, and they're the first numbers on the third level to make 43, which is the first number on the fourth level. 190 is randomly the first, well, systematically the first number on the fifth level. And it goes on. And it's like, until all the way you get to whatever level that is. And it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 levels up, and you're at 2,000 or near 3,000. It was a neat hobby. It was a neat project once in a while, but the thing is, in order for me to progress on it, I want to have a program do it, and then I want to generate the structure as it goes, because the structure on its own doesn't make any sense. And here's a key factor. Because there is no way to produce this in nature naturally, none whatsoever would ever do this, you end up with, okay, maybe there is some kind of genetic system that works like this, but highly unlikely. So what happens is, because it can't be found in nature, if you find this out in the universe, you know you have an intelligence, right? It's the only other explanation. If nothing else, and the best part is, you don't need to have like these sets of numbers. This structure of, for example, how do I draw it? Like the structure of the pyramid, if you were to draw it in three-dimensional space, would be something that if you saw that structure, that particular pyramid, you would know that it had to have been somebody who did this block puzzle who came up with that structure. Or they just made it, maybe they figured it out randomly, but also it's more likely that they had, like if you see two gaps like this in the thing where blocks should be, like what would that look like? It would be set of two, set of two, and then even the gaps don't make a lot of sense because you have to have them be adjacent. So like you have like a window there and the block on top, and like, I don't know, it's something I have to, like, I'd have to design something, I'd have to find someone who knows coding to be like, yeah, write a program that can finish this sequence up to 1,000, which would be insane. As you can see, I went down to like 130 or so, and I kind of lost track. Um, to be clear, the 108, did I remove that number? Yeah, 100 and, why is the 108 not missing? Hold on. 108 should be missing, or something. Or is that that's an alternate reality number. Never mind. Which it gets complicated. But if you look at that, then you have maybe, okay, 190 would be the first number on that high number list that has to be still removed. But I haven't even gotten to 140s, and that's the earliest number that is high, or 105, whatever. It's systematic, it's procedural generated. It can't be formulated out to do anything more efficiently to find the next number. So it's very telltale of an intelligence had to have done this, and it's a very limited. The thing is, again, this is a kid's game with blocks. So even the base level intelligence can make this, but only an intelligence would make this. It's kind of that interesting, like, it's the bare bones for intelligence litmus test, that if you made this, you have this like affinity for memory, and or you made a set of blocks that have all the numbers 1 through 100 not repeating, and you made a pyramid out of it just out of random thought. And it's silly, it's whatever, but it's also like, it would be so interesting to find out if there is a structure in nature that does this, like a flower or something, and if this can predict certain things. Like 1213, most crazy prediction ever. And like the gaps are in between are like there's 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1. Like, what are these gaps? How does it make any sense? And it's like, obviously it's to do with the procedure gives you that. And I feel fun about it, and every so often I look at this and I'm like, I worked on that for hours, and I just gave up because it became kind of tedious and I kind of want to automate the system now that I know the base of it, or the core of what this is, and just curious what percentage of numbers that have been erased versus numbers that remain on the real number line. All numbers that have been moved over technically have already been used up and are, in a sense, removed and erased, but they are used to then later on take more numbers off the real number line. So you wouldn't just take off 12 unless you were already using the 3 and the 9, which are products of the 1, 2, and the 5, 4 pairs. And the only reason you would say 5, 4 is because you did the 1, 2 in the first place. You wouldn't say 5, 4 because you would say, like in Fibonacci, not Bernacci, you say, I'm sorry, you say, whatever he said in whatever people say in the Fibonacci series that I don't remember. Well, 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 plus 5 is 13. And that weird thing. And that's interesting and stuff, but it's not this. This is just some random nonsense. that really, what is the purpose of this? What does it actually do? How do I do anything about this? And it's like, it's just a random thing. And I've never heard of it before. And I thought of this back in high school. And it was just a hobby. Did you find this interesting? I found it interesting when I was doing it. Um, I found it interesting that you can have numbers so early that, like 31, which makes this big gap. It's like you can't use those values anymore. So the 15 and 16 are just completely ignored. Like you don't even utilize those numbers. Unlike most every other number on the real number line, every number that's used, um, well, obviously any number that's used is usually used in another process. So like the 1 and the 2 might not, the 3 might not be used in any other process, but at least the 3 is used with the 9. But 15 and 16 are deliberately used to make a sum that you can't find the block that would go there. So you literally just don't use those values. So it's an example of, in all of this addition, some value is missing. And I'm just genuinely curious. Besides numbers that are just shuffled around, these ones are just absolutely negated. They don't exist. They are not part of any other addition. They're just gone. And I'm curious what percentage of numbers, 1 to 1,000, 1 to a million, I'm not going to do it, but what percentage of those numbers remain, and how much ends up, how does it progress? How many, um, as you go higher and higher, how many numbers are just vanishing and no longer have any value? And only because you had any memory whatsoever would that even occur. Because otherwise, you would just forget. Like if you just erase the numbers, just take those numbers and just simply erase them, you would still have, well, then you just have numbers that, okay, every two numbers, and then you delete whatever number they sum up. And then that's a different sequence because 12 would still exist. So you'd do 1211 instead, and then you would end up with um, 23 instead, right? So every other number would be added together. That's Fibonacci and stuff, and that'd be different. And it's this thing where the products then make other products, and that all takes away from what already exists. And because there's only one copy of everything, they can't like keep going at that forever. They have to eventually end up with gaps like this. So not just 31 can't be used again, but also the stuff that could make 31 the second time isn't used again, and that's, I don't know, part of me just whatever. Numberphile, please contact me. I'd love to know if anyone, or if anyone from Numberphile sees this, like, have you ever heard of anything like this? I don't know why I don't do the research myself to find out if anyone's done something like this. Obviously, it wouldn't just be called Number Pyramid. It'd be called something, but it's so, how do you even find something like that? How do you like manually look for things like this kind of secrets? Because if you look for Fibonacci numbers, you can like figure out the Fibonacci numbers and then write them down and then maybe Google that. But has anyone ever done this? I don't know. And then what would it even equate to? And it's like, well, you could do it. I don't know how I got into the idea of antimatter. where the two things mixing together make the anti-number, or the two anti-numbers merge together to make a solid. Is it possible that the anti-functions that I thought of, these other numbers to the right, or sorry, to the left, are numbers of stable antimatter particles? If that happens to be true, please Nobel Prize me. I'm seriously confused, like wondering, because like these are things that after the stuff was removed, this was the stuff that you take the empty spaces, add them together, and you end up with these results. It'd be interesting to see that these are antimatter particle values that are valid and stable. But in order to find them, holy crap, you will not find these in fusion reaction tests just randomly. It's not something that you can just say, going to look for and hope that it'll work, because it just won't do that, right? You're not just gonna. It's hard to synthesize heavier antimatter particles because they're just not stable past antihydrogen, right? But what if these are? That's just a weird random thought. I doubt it has anything to do with anything. But it's about, yeah, if you added certain values together, they could make something that then becomes stable. And that could be revolutionary if this sequence of antimatter ends up becoming something that is used ever. And then what, like, I don't understand. The alternate reality stuff is where the antimatter and the matter collide. And I don't know I don't even remember my process for 13 being a thing. Like, what happened with 13? Why is 13 a real number? Oh, 13 is a real number. 31 is negated, so it's just gone. And then you have alternate reality numbers, where the 77 was made from what? What made 36 and 41 made from the real numbers made 77. Why is it an alternate reality number? I don't understand. Oh, because it was made back there, so it's an alternate reality negative sum? That's weird. Look, I'm not able to look at this and say I even know what I'm talking about back then, because you got 108 up there, and then it's like, well, that has to have been from somewhere, and it's not taken from here, so it's like, where is the 108? Maybe I didn't keep track of everything, or maybe because it's an alternate reality number that doesn't have to be taken from the real number line. I don't remember. This was a mess. The alternate reality stuff in the antimatter stuff was just an absolute mess. I color coded it to make it slightly more trackable for my brain, but then what the heck are these numbers? I know I wrote it down in the margins. I do not remember what the hell I wrote down. I would have to translate all of this stuff or transfer it all. The numbers as cubes and the digits and something moves in one thing. Huh. And so on. Okay. Anyway, this document is available for free. I think I already posted it on Twitter, but it's just, huh? To me, even me, it looks like the ramblings of a madman who, like, at this point, I'm so far removed from everything that I don't remember what I was even talking about. I just remember that this was neat back then. Yeah, numbers getting banished and stuff. What am I even what am I on about? 13 was the first to survive, and then 18, and good old 31. What am I on about? I'm serious. Yeah, 31. Whatever. Gonna go.